To get started. Thank you for joining the top 8 security blind spots in your SaaS environment. My name is David Politis, founder and CEO here at BetterCloud. And if anyone has been to one of these webinars before, you know that this is all we're about. Your SaaS environment, how to manage, secure your SaaS environment. We've been doing this for about 6.5 years at this point, called SaaS. Before it was called cloud. And this is a topic I'm very passionate about. At a high level, I believe strongly in the adoption of SaaS applications and the impact that it can have on businesses all over the world. Any type of business, any size business. I'm very passionate about reducing the friction in the work environment by bringing SaaS applications to bear and deploying SaaS applications. But there are a lot of challenges, it's just the reality. And we're going to spend some time talking about some of the top blind spots we've seen over all these years, but really more recently as the SaaS adoption has reached this tipping point, we're seeing these blind spots and we want to share them so that you can avoid them in your own environment. So with that, I'll jump right into it. First question, what is a blind spot? When we talk about these top 8 blind spots, what are we talking about? And it's a hidden threat. It's something you did not know existed. And there's really no way to get visibility into that until it happens. That's why it's a blind spot. And in these SaaS environments, whether you're running one SaaS application or 100, it really doesn't matter. These blind spots are very similar across the board. There's some dangerous ones. There's some other ones that you just aren't aware of that may not be dangerous per se, but are impacting your environment. And we're going to touch on all of that today. But this is not the first time that there have been these kinds of blind spots in environments like this. If we think back to the late 90s when email started getting delivered to personal mobile devices or mobile devices in general, and when employees just started getting access to corporate data on mobile devices, this was not really possible until the late 90s. And when that started happening, there was so much just excitement. I remember people talking about how that changed their way of working, and they could now work from anywhere and all the time and from this mobile device. It was crazy. I mean, these are just some of the headlines from that period of time. But if we try to rewind to that, employees were just ecstatic, and it really did make a massive change to productivity in my perspective. We almost can't think back to the time when we weren't able to receive our email all the time on any device. It's hard to remember that, but that was amazing. And IT, I think in a lot of cases, the technology was touted as this is amazing. And thank you, IT, for bringing this to our company. And this is really going to help. But then you start looking at some of the headlines that were coming out early 2000s. And as we hit that tipping point of adoption and as this became an attack vector that people were aware of and had become sophisticated enough to take advantage of, you start seeing some of these types of headlines, and you start seeing, okay, great, well, that's amazing that these BlackBerries, are getting email, and people can get back to people at any time, on vacation, anywhere they are, without their device there. But then you start having real problems, and these problems, of course, are coming back onto IT. And this is around the time that you start seeing the MDM vendors and EMM vendors starting, being founded. You start seeing this new breed of companies like AirWatch, for example, that focused on how do you secure these devices? How do you make sure that the data living on these devices is in our control? And I feel like that is happening again, and this is all repeating itself, which is generally the trend in IT, right? These cycles, they repeat themselves, and we're going through that cycle right now. You see the adoption of SaaS, 2008, 2009, you start seeing this really pick up, and these amazing headlines. This is going to change the way people work, and my employees can now collaborate and innovate together. And there's all these new technologies, and it's best in breed. And people are starting up. There's thousands of tech startups every year because it's easy to create these very specific micro solutions for a specific problem, and it's amazing. And again, I like I said in the beginning, I mean this as sincerely as I can. I'm a huge believer in what SaaS can do to an organization. And I push everyone I speak to if you're not really leveraging SaaS, adopting SaaS applications, building out that environment, to do that, because it's gonna make them look like heroes. But again, there are a lot of challenges that come with that. And so now, for the last 5 years, however long it's been, 6, 7, this adoption has been increasing and increasing. And there's more applications, and there's companies like Slack that weren't even on the radar 7 years ago, and all of a sudden now are the de facto for companies' chat and collaboration. You start seeing that and you realize, okay, there's challenges that are coming with that. And there have been a couple of public breaches, that have happened in the last 12 months that are related to these new open platforms that end users have a lot of control, and you're giving the power to them, and they're bringing people in from outside the company to work on stuff together. And there's been a couple of breaches, but it really hasn't been as public as what we see in the companies that we engage with. And that's a big reason why we're sharing this today, is because we're seeing this in a way with our community and the customers and the companies and the IT professionals we engage with. We're seeing it at a pretty alarming rate, that there are these blind spots and there are these unforeseen challenges that are there that could cause some serious damage. And we feel we've been doing this a lot the last couple of months, trying to get this information out there to get ahead of it. And one thing that we did a webinar recently around talking to people about how do you even know how to manage and secure your SaaS environment? Meaning, where are you getting this information? Did you learning it in school? Is there a certification? Is your manager teaching you? How do you learn? And what we found in that and subsequent surveys is that the vast majority of IT professionals, and I would argue that the IT professionals in our community that are joining these webinars are the most forward-thinking and the most advanced. And we're talking about 78% are saying that they are just figuring it out themselves. 78% in one way or another answered, we are figuring this out ourselves. This is our first time managing SaaS applications, or I have no one on my team who knows, or I'm literally just getting started. I don't even know anything. And that's 78%. Again, I'm just going to repeat, this is our community, our network of people. And those are the most forward-thinking IT professionals probably in the world. And we're seeing this number. There not enough time has gone by for there to be, there are no certifications for SaaS, your how to manage and secure your SaaS environment. There's no industry standard for this new paradigm for the digital workplace. It doesn't exist. There are not courses in schools. There are not, like, this is all being done through just trial and error. This is being done through word of mouth. This is being done through just someone getting hired and being told, you got to go manage that. Or I've been at companies where the entire team are Exchange administrators, and they've made a decision to roll out Google, but also to roll out Slack and to roll out Box and to roll out Salesforce. And all of a sudden, they're just being asked to take on this completely new challenge that they have no experience with at all and no resources to go to. So, and it's important, maybe the most important statement here is that you don't know what you don't know, but that is not your fault, because these resources don't exist, and we just don't have a foundational level of knowledge in IT organizations to do this. When I look at our customers and I look at how they're being poached by other companies that are trying to create these digital workplaces, they're looking for experts. There are just not that many experts out there. And you can see that. You can see by the movement of some of our customers going from one organization to another and transforming one after the other, because there are just not that many people who have this expertise. And so it's not really anyone's fault if they're running into blind spots. It's not really anyone's fault if they're having these challenges. It's not really anyone's fault if you feel like you just don't know what you're doing. I'm saying this is from a survey that we did, and we're seeing this. This is across the board. We're seeing this challenge. So for this webinar, really, when we talk about this learning curve, this, maybe you've seen this in the past, the 5 stages of learning, but it starts with, this is a pretty common chart that you'll see and concept. And what it starts with is, at the very beginning, when you're about to take on anything, you're about to learn anything. I mean, I was thinking about, I imagine, when I remember trying to learn how to drive a car, and, even if you start there, you kind of say, yeah, I don't know, this seems not that hard. I don't really know what to expect, but you're blissfully unaware, which I like that. I like that term. And then you start doing whatever that thing is, and you're driving, you drive around a parking lot, maybe you drive down your street, and you're like, yeah, this is really, really simple. I'm not really sure what the problem here is. This is the easiest thing to do is driving. And then something usually occurs. And at that point, you become very realistic about the situation, and it's usually pretty discouraging. So maybe you're driving, and all of a sudden it's the first time you're driving in a snowstorm, and you spin out. It's the first time. You can tell I've had some bad experiences, but and something occurs, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, maybe it's not as simple as I thought. Maybe you get into an accident because someone's in your blind spot, and you realize, oh man, I got to look over my shoulder when I turn or when I do that. And after some period of time, and this is just duration, I mean, you just need a certain amount of hours, you need a certain amount of time to do this work. At some level, you get to the point where you've achieved mastery, and you can really say, I am a master at whatever this is, whatever this craft is. And ultimately, the end is when you can teach others. So when I take us through this, I'm going to take us through this as you think about your SaaS environment. So you think about when you think about learning how to manage your SaaS applications, your SaaS environment, that blissfully unaware portion is you don't know what you don't know about these SaaS applications. You're thinking about and you're saying, oh, I'm going to deploy Slack. I just read about Slack pretty much everywhere, and this is I got to deploy this in my environment. My sales team is asking for it. My engineers are asking for it, and you just don't know what you don't know. You've read about it. You've heard that there's this product called Slack. You've heard it's maybe a little distracting, but it's really powerful, and there are these Slack bots. And you deploying a SaaS application is pretty straightforward. That's kind of the point. In most cases, it's pretty straightforward. You pay for it, you put your users in there, and you turn it on. And your users start using it because it's usually pretty straightforward on how to use it. It's the consumerization of IT. It's some product that they're using anywhere in their personal lives. And it seems pretty great. You've deployed, maybe you're 3 months in or 6 months in or a year in, even at that point, you're feeling very good. And again, your users, this is the most important part. Your users are coming to you and saying, thank you. This is amazing. We just deployed Dropbox, and oh my God, this is so much better than that file server that we had. And I really appreciate it. But then these blind spots hit. And when that occurs, that's when you take this plunge into this pit of sorrow, I will call it. You take this plunge because you get hit with these blind spots. Now, let me talk, I'll give you some examples of blind spots that maybe are less obvious, but you may have a blind spot of realizing, when we rolled this out, we didn't set any rules of engagement. We put out Slack and let anyone create channels, and we now have 1 million channels, and there's some very inappropriate things happening in those channels, and we should have put some more controls in place when we rolled it out. Maybe you roll it out and you realize, we never told people that we really need them using this platform versus that platform. And you come to the realization that half the licenses actually haven't been used in 6 months or a year. We see that happening all the time. It may be, oh man, I didn't realize that person left the company 6 months ago and they still have access to all these SaaS applications. It may be, there are a long, long list. And so some of those are dangerous, like I was talking about. Some of those may just be bad for the organization, bad culturally, bad. It depends. But there are these blind spots you get hit with. And unless you've done this, and I would argue, unless you've done this a number of times, it is hard to see those coming. That is why they're called blind spots. And then you get to the point where, you've now feel like you feel like, and you have mastered managing these SaaS applications. You know what the blind spots are. You've put the processes in place. You've gotten in front of them. That's really, really positive. The truth is, like I said before, few people that I'm aware of, we have 2,500, 3,000 customers. There are very few people I know. There are some on this webinar today, to be honest, but there are very few in general that I know that have truly mastered this art, if you will, of how to manage SaaS applications, this art and science. And it just, from all of the information we know and that we've gathered, there are just very few people now at this point. If you think about how few have achieved mastery, how few are actually teaching this, it's essentially non-existent. And again, the people who are in extremely high demand. And we're seeing CIOs we work with moving from org to org to org, because there aren't that many executives who understand how to do a true transformation, both on both sides, on the end user side, on the front end side, and on the back end IT operations side, security side. And so these are the 5 stages of learning. And what we're going to focus on here are some of those blind spots. And really, we're going to try specifically to focus on the most dangerous blind spots. So we talked about 8. We're going to go through all 8, but I'm going to go through in real detail with customer stories, the top 3 most dangerous blind spots. So before we continue, anyone who has been on these with me before knows before I get into some examples, I like to go ahead and ask poll questions to get a sense of our audience. So the first question here is, how many super admins do you have in your, how many super admins do you think you have in each of your SaaS applications? So we're talking about your core SaaS applications. So these are going to be your Slack. These are going to be, your Google, your G Suite, your Office 365, your, Dropbox, Box. I mean, essentially any core application that you have. So if you could go ahead and answer this. I know some of you are probably listening to me in the background. Hopefully you're not asleep. If you could go ahead and come back and just quickly answer this question. So how many super admins do you think you have in each of your core kind of primary, sanctioned SaaS applications? So I'll give everyone about a second here, a couple of seconds here. We're at about 75%. By the way, I'm going to show this information. I'm going to show you the poll when we're done here. So I'm going to give everyone another couple seconds to answer. Okay, thank you very much. So let me go ahead and share the results. Okay, so what we see here is the vast majority here saying 1 to 3 super admins. So we know that the first blind spot, and I will argue this is maybe the most important one, is that you have way more super admins in your org than you think, guaranteed. We know from previous surveys that the answer is going to be 1 to 3. Exactly what you guys answered, the 55% answered 1 to 3. We know that is the answer that we get. We get that number all the time. The actual answer is 13 to 19. Now, of course, this depends on the size of your organization. If you have a 20-person organization, you probably don't have 19 super admins. I've seen it, but that's probably not the case. But we're talking about 100-person, 500-person, 10,000-person org has this many super admins. Just to give you a sense, when mastery is achieved, what we're seeing is that that number needs to be in the vicinity of 3 to 4 max. And we're talking about big companies. We have organizations who, again, I would argue are some of the few that have created, who've gotten to that mastery level. They've got 70,000 employees and 3 super admins. Not exaggerating. That's real. We have companies that have 5,000 employees and have 3 super admins. We also have companies that have 500 employees and have 25 super admins. That is a big problem. That is a really, really big problem. And the reason is because the super admins, they essentially have, it's like the codes to the nuclear missiles. Like they have that kind of control and access. And when you think about that, there is a lot of risk there, where even if it's not malicious, you could have people making changes, and with super admin access, they can do some heavy duty damage. And I'll get into some of the stories, but you can imagine, I mean, they have full access to everything. And we've seen stories where people were given super admin access and they're just not coordinated with the other people in the IT org because there isn't a process, and they make a change and nobody else in the IT org knows that change was made in that environment because there aren't the right checks and balances. And that could be really very dangerous. I mean, disastrous is the best word to describe that. Again, I'll give you some stories here around that. So why is this even happening? Well, that I think is a big question that people ask is, well, I don't understand why this is even a problem. And the biggest problem, again, going back to, I'm not sure all of this is even your fault, is that many of the SaaS applications, they don't give enough granular admin roles and controls so that you can follow the least privilege model. They don't even have the ability for you to control that. And so you end up having to decide, do I give super admin access or do I give end user access? And essentially, if they're in IT, you're probably gonna have to give them super admin access. That's one reason. There are some cases where there probably is enough granularity, but it's just easier to just give out super admin access. I have seen organizations do this where they say, oh, well, that person needs access to, this calendar for this 1 week. And the only way they're going to be able to get that calendar because it's private is if they're a super admin. And that person becomes a super admin and is forever because no one goes back and does any checks on that. The reason this happens, and I've heard this from a lot of IT leaders, is that when they hire a help desk team, and they've got 30, 40, 50, 70 help desk people, and someone gets a ticket on the help desk to solve some problem, to fix something, a lot of cases, they may need super admin access to do that. So they request super admin access, they get it, and again, it never gets taken away. So this is a big problem. And this is a big problem now because of things like GDPR. Because one of the big elements of GDPR is who has access to all of your data. And so if you've got 13 to 19 super admins in an environment, you've got a lot of people who have access who don't need it. And you're going to have to bring that back. So this is a big challenge for people. And, some of the customer stories that we have here, I'm going to try to be quick, but these are important because these are real customer stories. And every story I'm going to give you, this is firsthand me speaking with a customer. So one story, kind of lifestyle brand, growing really fast, really, really fast, and started the company and needed to have, outsourced IT in the organization because that was just, they were moving so fast. They didn't feel like hiring full-time IT staff was the right decision. So they had an outsourced IT group with a bunch of help desk people who were essentially helping them and a bunch of other companies. And that outsourced IT group had super admin access. And one day, someone in that group was making some changes to on some specific set of users, making some changes, and by mistake deleted a number of users out of the org that were not supposed to be deleted. And if you think about the ramifications of that, there were people who thought they got fired from this company that did not get fired, but they had been deleted. They had no access to Slack. They had no access to, I forget the exact applications, but they had no access. They thought they had gotten fired. And that's because that particular person should not have had, they were a junior person. They should not have had full super admin access. They probably should have had edit rights on users. Maybe you could argue create rights, but to have delete, that's dangerous. I almost bet, of the hundreds of people we have on this webinar today, I almost bet that has happened somewhere in some org. Maybe it's happened because they've had super admin rights and did that in a UI. Maybe that's happened because they have super admin rights and they ran some script that they weren't supposed to run, or they didn't know how to run it, or they ran it against the wrong user. It doesn't matter. That's because of super admin rights. I have another story of a very large technology company going public. And this company had, for 500, 600 employees, 25 super admins, 25. And that was just because nothing malicious. Every IT person who started, at some point they had to take a ticket. At some point they need to be a super admin. And they made a change in their file sharing platform to make all files, the super admin, they were trying to do some action that they were asked to do. And instead they changed all files, I'm not making this up, all files to be shared publicly on creation or upload, all files. It has a settings at the domain, the org level. And that meant that every file for a couple of months was being created and being shared. Doesn't matter, CEO, CFO, shared publicly. These are not unique stories. This is, we see this every day, multiple times a day. I guarantee, if anyone, I would challenge anyone who's got more than a couple hundred employees to show that they've got one admin or two admins. It's not, in general, we are seeing that is a major blind spot. And there are some cases where super admins, if we get really, the scary parts is where super admins leave an organization and they still have super admin rights. That is, that's really a scary scenario. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So next question, I'm going to go ahead and again, I'll do the same thing where I show you the results, is what percentage of former employees, your former employees, still have access to your organization's data? So what percentage of any, just generally, of your former employees from your company do you believe still have access to your organization's data? So I'll let everyone vote here. This one I'm very curious about. We've never actually, I'm not sure if we've asked this question before anywhere. So I'm really curious to see the results here. So again, I'd love anyone who's listening in the background, just a swag here. Just try to give me some sense of what your gut tells you in terms of what percentage of people who left the company who should not have access. They should not have access to your data, but still have access to your data. And this is probably not your fault. This may be your predecessor's fault. This may be, so we're just going to wait for a couple more people here to vote. Just maybe a dozen more people. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. So I will show you guys the results now. So what you see, we definitely have not asked this before. What you see, 76% is greater than 0%. That somebody who is no longer at the organization has access. And again, I'm going to just say, because we've been doing this a long time and been spending a lot of time with customers recently, I would bet that zero, very few of those are actually zero. And again, I'm not saying this is someone's fault, because in a lot of cases you don't have the tools to control this or control it well or whatever it may be. But this is a problem. If it's more than zero, it's a problem. If there's one person who left and still has access and they're malicious, that's a problem. So we're going to go into our second really, to my opinion, very scary blind spot. One of the most dangerous is offboarding. We have looked inside of BetterCloud, polled the BetterCloud employees, and we see that about 10% of our employees, maybe even a little bit more, have access to their former employer's data. Think about that. That's probably pretty representative of the whole. And it's in different cases. In some cases it has access to email still, which is not that often. But in a lot of cases, it's files. A lot of cases, it's files. In some cases, it's Slack environments. In some cases, it's their own native applications that they've built. But the answer is it's a problem. And the reason it's a problem is because there's a lot of damage someone can do if they have access. And especially if someone's been fired from an organization, it's depends on the person. And they could do some pretty bad stuff. This example here, in the top right, that would be pretty bad. And this is, but we're hearing these stories all the time. We've seen some stories of people years later in an environment, and someone identifies that and sees that because something happens. And so this is happening, to my point. I don't even know this is people's fault. This is happening because, generally speaking, offboarding is a very manual process. It takes a lot of work to truly offboard someone. What we see people doing is logging in to that user's account, essentially getting access to that user's account after they're gone, and having to do work inside the account and move the mail, and then do this with their files and delete these calendar things, and then wipe the device. And it's just the time it takes in a lot of cases. If something is going on, we've seen this. I'm sure everyone here on this webinar and in our company has seen this, where you let someone go, and it's a Friday at 8 p.m. and something happened, you let them go. You've got a lot of work that has to happen, and maybe someone's on vacation. We've seen some things where there is a person to offboard, 2,000 person company, 5,000 person company, and they have a person to do offboarding. But what happens if that person's on vacation? What happens if that person is sick? What happens if that person just isn't there at that exact moment? So there's a lot of challenges here with offboarding, and some of the very specific stories that we have. So one of the stories is we're a venture-backed company. We've raised money from venture capitalists, and I was speaking to a venture capitalist recently who told me that in their Dropbox environment, so venture capitalists who invest in tech companies, a lot of them use Dropbox as their data room, if you will. So that's where they have all the information about the deals that they're doing, their board meetings. And they had a partner who left the fund and went to a different fund that was pretty competitive with them, looking at the same kind of deals. And for 2 full years, that partner had full access to their Dropbox environment. That meant that every time they were working on a deal, that partner who had left had access to that environment and could see and go around them, offer a better price, go in faster, whatever the case may be. That is truly business impact. Like that is as bad as it comes, in terms of how that impacts your business. That's IP for venture capitalists, for investors, finding deals, what those deals cost, all the information. That's IP. And that was just wide open to a competitor, essentially. I heard, this one was a really bad one. I heard of a company the other day who an employee left and had Salesforce access for 6 months and went to a literally direct competitor and just did full downloads of all the database and everything out of Salesforce, and was calling on all those customers. There's a company that I know of that's a SaaS company, that's a public company, that has a SOC 2 certification, which is a security, compliance, privacy certification, and they lost their certification. They lost it because it took them 2 to 3 weeks to offboard an employee properly. So you think about that. Someone leaves the organization, again, they're upset, whatever it may be. They're going to go and there's some bad, they can be pretty malicious in terms of what they do in that environment. So offboarding, second one. Third, before we get here, let me go ahead and again open up a poll. So this poll is very simple one. Do you think you have any confidential or sensitive data exposed? Again, we're not trying here to say that you're not doing your job. Just it's really a question of in your organization, maybe you just got there, maybe you've even been there, but you don't have control over this. Just trying to get a sense of how controlled you feel your environment is. Again, very simple answer here, straightforward. Okay, a couple more people. Okay, great. Let me share the results here. So here, I would say, you're seeing, we're talking about well over 80%. My guess is I would drop the not sure into the yes category. We're talking about 80%, 80 something percent who have data shared, confidential or sensitive data shared, and exposed. So, this is definitely, and for a lot of reasons, this is the third, and I wouldn't necessarily say in this order, but this is the third big blind spot that I would say is the most dangerous. And what's important here, and this is why I keep making this clarification, this is not always malicious. This could be accidental. The way these platforms work, they really drive collaboration, and they drive sharing, and they drive bringing in partners to your environment and customers, and it's not malicious always. It could be accidental, but there's so many places for data to be exposed. When you think about this, there's challenges from let's talk about email distribution lists. You could have email distribution lists in G Suite and Office 365 where you have external people on those distribution lists. Maybe they were added there because they were working on a project. Maybe they were a contractor. Maybe they were an employee early on who put in their personal email address. Literally, I've seen all of it, and they're sitting in this email distribution list, and they're just getting every message that's being sent, whether they should or shouldn't. We've seen this in a lot of cases. So it may not be that someone's sending them data or they're going and getting data that is sensitive or confidential, but they may just be receiving emails. I mean, the number of people I think who honestly, it's happened to me before at a previous organization, and I was receiving these emails, and I even told the company. I remember telling the company, I am getting the emails, the internal emails, and IT just never fixed it. It was almost a year. And I told them. So how many people are just sitting there, reading it, kind of curious, whatever it may be. So that may be email distribution list. They're obviously with files. Obviously, there are files. Someone does a download, from some system, your HR system. Again, I have seen this. Download from the HR system, all employees, all their data, all their salary information, and then they upload it to Box. And by mistake, they pressed something, or they did something, or someone who they're collaborating on it with did something, and it became exposed. And again, it happens because the power of these SaaS apps, the reason that we love them so much, the reason especially users love them so much, is that these SaaS apps help drive this collaboration. You can bring in Slack, you can bring in external guests into a single channel, multi-channel. You can bring them into your environment, and that is powerful. There's a lot of good reasons to do that. But if that person stays past the point where they are engaged with your organization, that's a problem. If they're in the wrong channel, that's a problem. If you've got a file that's shared with someone who's consulting with you to their personal Gmail account, and that person gets compromised because a lot of people's personal Gmail accounts are not as secure as you'd like, you now have these so many exposure points. It's just the surface area of your data it's everywhere. You've got files. I've talked about this a lot. You've got files that are up, they live in Google Drive, but they're uploaded into, they're connected into Slack. They're uploaded into Salesforce. They live in Dropbox as well. That happened. That's real. So the surface area, the exposure, and calendars, I mean, literally, you could just keep going. All the data objects, the whole concept is open up, collaborate, share. It makes a massive difference to the business's bottom line, but it is IT's responsibility, whether we like it, we don't, whether it's fair, whether it's not. It is IT's responsibility to know about it and to control that and to be aware of that. And I think what we see is exactly what that poll showed, which is most people know that they have data exposed in some way, shape, or form. Even if we don't want to know it, we know it. The challenge is what do you do about it? What kind of data? Is there enough time in the day to go find it all and to remediate it? That is the question. So let me give you just two very quick customer stories. So one customer, media company, they were about to announce something really, really major. Public company, media company, about to announce something major. I won't say what it is, but something major. And they were preparing a big press release. They had a tour happening. They had all this happening, and they through our product, actually, in this case, they ran an audit, and they found that a lot of the files that were going to talking about this initiative, without saying what it is, hard to explain it, but the files were shared publicly on the internet, like searchable on the internet, because the person was new to Google Docs in that case and thought that they were sharing it inside their org, inside of this company. But in reality, they were sharing it publicly. That was a major, you can imagine, preparing for this massive, I mean, this was what they were hoping was going to give their stock price a bump and all this stuff. And almost days before, they realized, wow, all this data is out there. Someone could find this. Another story is customer. It's a healthcare kind of organization. It's let's just say it has a lot of doctors in it, and it's all over the country, and so thousands of employees. Again, healthcare though, and they were looking at some information, again, using our product, and they found that they had 80 people forwarding their corporate email to personal accounts. And a portion of those people were doctors. And when we talk about HIPAA, again, compliance, now forget healthcare, but GDPR more broadly, that's not okay. You know, the data leaving your environment, it's, again, you think back to the mobile device example I gave in the very beginning. It's very, very similar to that example, which is now all this control is in the user's hands, and sometimes maliciously, sometimes not. There are a lot of exposures and blind spots for you. But if something happened, and if there was a HIPAA violation, who's going to get screamed at? Probably that one doctor and IT. So that is the importance, and something we've talked about in the past, which I just want to reiterate here, is from an IT perspective, there's not a lot of glory in going and plugging all these blind spots. There's not a lot of glory unless you tell people that you did it, unless you're prepared to take those wins to your executives, to the business as a whole, and educate them. If you do, I guarantee there is a lot of glory in that, and potentially more than in some of the other work that you're doing. The problem is, a lot of times I think we feel that if I plug this gap, if I plug this hole, if I spend the whole weekend working on this, no one's going to know that I did it. I know it's good for the business, but it doesn't really help me. It doesn't help my job. Maybe it covers me a little bit from getting in trouble, but there's not a lot of, again, glory in that. But I think there can be, and I actually think there needs to be, because executives are worried. Boards are worried. These conversations come up we have customers who call us and say their board members who know nothing about anything related to IT are telling the executive team that they've read about this or they read about that, and that this needs to get taken care of. that's the opportunity to be ahead of this and say, we already have this under control. Other companies are dealing with this, but we saw these ahead of time and we're dealing with this. So for us, the way we think about our role, whether it be this webinar, whether it be any of the material that we share, we think about our role as shortening that dip into the trough of sorrow, whatever we want to call it. We think we can help identify those blind spots ahead of time because we've seen it. We have seen it with literally thousands of organizations. We've seen it, and we can help people avoid it just through education, just by telling you it's there. I assume everyone's going to go after this and do a couple. I'm sure people have taken notes to go look at this and look at this setting and look at this. And that's a big, big thing, because otherwise what's going to happen is when these problems start arising, people are going to start saying, oh, I need to, no more SaaS, no more collaboration, no more. And it feels like we don't, I believe like that momentum has to continue. So part of what we're trying to do today is help avoid those blind spots, because we've seen them and we can tell you that they're coming. And then the second is to help people become SaaS management experts. There isn't anyone out there driving this forward, and we want to be that company. We've been that company for the last 6 years, but we now have the resources and we now have the scale that we can afford to really do this. And even when I was talking about Better IT, that's a lot what Better IT is about. Better IT as this community is a place for people to go and share best practice, to learn from the masters of this. That we have those people are in our community, and there's an opportunity to go and say, hey, I'm blissfully unaware. I literally I'm starting this process. Tell me what I need to know. And again, we're talking about dangerous blind spots today, and we're talking about some high risk areas, but it's not just that. It's even, how do I train my users? What documentation do I need? How do I roll this out? Which application is the best for an organization like mine at my size, growing at this speed in this location? There's so much of that. And even though there are few masters, if together we come together and share this information, that is how we create more masters. And that is what we're really big about in our community. So we talked about these 8 really critical blind spots. We talked about the top 3. As you can see with the time, where it's going to be impossible to get, we cannot get through all 8. But these are some of the other areas that you should be aware of: insider threats, external access, group management, licenses, maintenance. These are some critical blind spots. We went through, I would say, the three, but probably most dangerous. But these are the most common critical blind spots that we're seeing. We wrote up the team wrote up an amazing white paper that I urge you, there's customer stories in there. There's real life scenarios where you could take that to your managers, to your executives, and show them what could happen if you don't focus in this area. And I really urge you to go, if you have some time, download that. We're going to go to Q&A in a second. So if you have questions, I'd appreciate if you ask the questions in the Slack community. But if you're in the GoToMeeting app and you want to ask them there, I'll try to pull them from both places. Also my email, dave@bettercloud.com. If you have feedback here, I'm sure you have a lot of, for those of you that have been doing this for a while, or maybe you have mastered it or feel like you've mastered it. For those of you that feel like their blind spots were completely missing, I hope everyone knows at this point, again, anyone who's heard me present before, I love that feedback. That's how we get better. That's how we learn. That's how we share with everyone else. So if you have any comments, any feedback, if you want to see our product and how we can help, I'm not going to say to you right now that we solve every single problem ever that you could ever imagine in your SaaS environment, but we work alongside and complement some of the other products you may have in place. You may have something like a Okta in place, some kind of identity provider. We work very nicely and complementary to that. We are not competitive with that. And you actually need our functionality to truly do the rest of identity management, not access, just to be clear, not access. That's not what we do, but the next level of identity, the configurations, the settings. Who is this user? What are they using? How are they interacting with other users? You need a product like BetterCloud. You want to see how your files are being shared, not just in one app, in multiple apps. You want to see when they're being downloaded. You want to see there's a lot of value that we can bring, and we believe we're a core piece of the SaaS management framework, if you will. But even if not that, we can share with you our stories and at least help you point you in the right direction in terms of what to do in your environment. So with that, stop talking for a second, and I will take a look at some questions. So one of the first questions that came in here is, how can we as a community lobby to SaaS vendors for better and more granular permissions? This is a great question. We have had conversations with these SaaS vendors. I believe that the only way we're really going to get there is for some standard to be created, and someone is going to have to take the lead on that. And I am not sure who, an existing vendor, I believe, is going to have to come up with the standard. And my unfortunate feeling is that that's going to be hard, and to get the other SaaS vendors to comply to that standard, it's going to be hard. But if we could take something like, Skim, for example, maybe we could, if there was something like Skim and you could extend that down to permissioning, that would work. Now again, one of the challenges that each platform has its own data objects, it has its own structure. So for example, something like Salesforce, it would be hard for Salesforce to follow the exact same model as, let's say, Box or Okta or Workday, because it's just different objects, it's different use cases, and so I think that's one of the problems. Honestly, I don't. It's a good question. I'm not. I don't know exactly how we do that, but it's a good question. Another question. Let me see here. Do you know of any security checklists that outline all of blind spots? So I mean, I would say all no, because to the point before, I mean, there are really no standards for this. We're essentially doing the research for the industry just by talking to customers. No one has really outlined the entire list. We'd love to. We have a pretty long list internally. It's not publishable yet, but the white paper we have right at this moment is the best we have for the most common ones and the most critical ones. But we are working towards something like that, because I don't know of a place where that is. I personally believe a lot of those checklists that exist out there, they're just antiquated. This is a new problem. It only is happening now because the adoption of SaaS is reaching a critical mass. Bigger customers, mid-market, enterprise, the SaaS adoption curve, it's only happening now. So you're only now seeing the problems. And I think it's going to take a little bit of time for people to acknowledge and see the blind spots. Like I said before, it's just time. There's a certain amount of duration that has to happen. If I use the car example, it's maybe a stupid one, but if I use that analogy, if you learn how to drive a car and you're, right at the beginning of summer, it's going to take a long time before you hit a massive snowstorm that you have to drive in. It's just going to take time. If you live somewhere where it never snows, you're never going to hit that until you do. And when you do, that could be really, really dangerous. And I feel like that's essentially where we are right now. This is a great one. Any tips on raising security awareness for the end user? I love this, because I think at the core of most of what I talked about, not all of it, but most of what I talked about is there's end user behavioral problems here. And so I believe that change management is such an important pillar to the adoption of SaaS. And unfortunately, not enough is invested in change management. I'm talking about generally as companies, we don't invest enough in change management. We make a lot of assumptions, and we really let users go out on their own. Even here at BetterCloud, we do things, I would say, pretty well. But even here, you have people joining an organization and you just assume, well, they probably know how to use Gmail and they probably know how to use Slack and they probably know how to use, you just assume that. And there's a lot of that onboarding, the ongoing change management as these platforms have new features. And that's just hard work. I mean, that there's nothing to, you just need hours in front of people. You need hours in front of them. You need a mechanism to communicate with them that they're actually going to read, which we all know doesn't really happen very often. It is all, in my opinion, it's about change management, and it's about pointing out, something we do internally that I love, that was brought to us by someone we hired, was we fish ourselves. Our security team here fishes our employees on purpose and then reports back to the company as a whole to say, this is how we did against the phishing campaign that we ran. Even they don't tell me when we're running the campaigns, and they see how many people were successfully phished, how many people put in their passwords, how many people went through that process. And when we started this 2 years ago, 3 years, I don't remember how long ago it was a large percentage of people who ran into that. I mean, who would give their passwords. Today, it's almost zero. People are constantly just paranoid about any email that doesn't look right. They're paranoid, even if it's a real email, because of the phishing campaigns we've run. So it has to be done that way to make someone feel. I think the reason that worked is when you go through that and that happens to you. I'll give you another example. We ran a bounty program internally for people's unlocked laptops. And so we started with the executives, and I said, if someone can get to my laptop and send a message for me, then I'll pay you $100. The first day, I cannot make this up, the first day that we did this, someone came and sent a message from me, paid $100, and I promise you that has never happened again, never will happen. As soon as I even look away from my computer, I lock it. And so there are things like that that's the way to get people just thinking about security in general, in my opinion. Let me see here. So there's a lot of other questions. Some of these are pretty specific. So what I'm going to do is we'll take these questions. We may, if they're in Better IT, we may answer them in Better IT. Otherwise, we'll follow up with answers to the questions we did not answer here. I really appreciate everyone's time today. I really appreciate you joining. And again, my email is dave@bettercloud.com. I urge you, if you have feedback, you have comments, I would love to talk about it. I understand that this is a big challenge for people, and we want to help. Even if it's just through education, we want to help. This is what we do, and this is what we're focused on. So, with that, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, want to talk, let me know. Otherwise, you can download the white paper, and there's a lot of good information there. Love to hear from you. Thank you very much.